Now that we've gotten a little bit of hefty coding out of the way, let's simplify things a little bit, and let's talk about how to create some simple button animations in Flash. And this is going to require very, very little action script. In fact, the only action script we're going to need is a little stop action. So let's get started. We're going to create a button, and let's create a button with a rectangular background. So we'll choose the rectangle tool. For our fill color, we'll just choose a medium gray color, and then we'll draw the background shape of our button, and then we're going to put some text on it. So we'll use the text tool. I'm going to choose white for the fill color, and I've got some things interfering with my colors here, so I'm going to click on the color wheel and choose white here. Click on OK, and then we'll click inside the rectangle and we'll type our text for our button. Let's just call it button, and then we'll switch to the selection tool by hitting V on the keyboard, and then we'll drag this into place. Okay, so our text is going to be aligned towards the left end of our button, and if we have multiple buttons with different sized text fields here, it will look pretty decent. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a button where the background is going to animate out to the side a little bit. It's going to increase in size as we hover over it. And then when we move our mouse away from it, it's just going to snap back to its current position. So what we need to do is convert this to a symbol. So let's highlight everything there, make sure that you have both the background and the text highlighted, and we'll hit F8 to convert that to a symbol. Make sure you have button symbol highlighted. Let's go back to our basic options so it's not too confusing. We'll select button symbol here. It doesn't really matter where the registration point is, the upper left hand corner is fine. And we'll just call this symbol button because we're not very creative today. We'll click on OK, and then we'll double click to go into that button symbol. Okay, so we have our up, over, down, and hit state. For our up state, we already have everything like we want it, but for our over state, we want our button to animate, or our button background to animate out to the side. Now let's start by putting our button text and our background on separate layers. That's going to make this easier to do. So we're going to do that using the distribute to layers command. Now you could highlight both of these and use the distribute to layers command, but what that would do is it would empty layer 1, and then it would create two separate layers underneath with both of these objects in it. Really, we just want two layers. We don't need that empty layer. So we're just going to distribute the background to layers using the distribute to layers command. Now there are a couple ways to access this command. We could go to modify, timeline, distribute to layers, or you can see the keyboard shortcut here is Control-Shift-D or Command-Shift-D if you're using a Mac. Or another quick way to do it is you can just right-click on the object that you want to send to its own layer, and then go down to Distribute to Layers. Now when you do this, be sure to right-click on the object that you want to be on the bottom, because when you distribute something to layers, it's going to move it to a layer below the current layer. So if we try to distribute this button text to layers by right-clicking and clicking on Distribute to Layers, it would send it to a layer below the rectangle layer, and we wouldn't be able to see the button anymore. Now we could easily fix that by dragging that layer above the other layer, but it's a lot easier if we just do it the right way to start with. So we're going to right click on the background and click on Distribute to Layers. So now that background has been put on its own layer below the current layer, below the text layer. So let's double click on that layer name there. We'll call it BG for background. We'll double click on the top layer name and we'll call it text. And now we have each on its own layer. Okay, now the text is not going to change when we hover over this button. So for the text layer in the over state, I'm just going to hit F5 to insert a frame there so that it extends out the current keyframe to the over state. For the background layer, however, we're going to change. So I'm going to click on the over state for the background layer and hit F6. Now in the over state for the background layer, we're going to convert this to a movie clip. So I'm going to click on the background, hit F8 to convert it to a symbol. We'll select a movie clip, and for the symbol name we'll just call it button BG for button background. And for this one, make sure that your registration point is somewhere along the left. It can be upper left, middle left, bottom left. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure it's along the left because we're going to expand this out to the right. And if our registration point is in the center and we try to expand this, it will expand in both directions. It's a lot easier if we just stick that registration point in the upper left hand corner. Okay, so button BG. Click on OK, and there we go, it's now a movie clip. Now, the background in our up state is still just a plain rectangle. It's a raw shape, but we don't need it to do anything, so it's okay that it's a raw shape. In the over state, we now have something different here. We have a movie clip. So let's go into that movie clip and create our animation. So just double click on the movie clip. We're now inside the button BG timeline, and now we'll create our animation. So the first thing we need to do is we need to decide how long we want this animation to take. Well, let's say we want it to take somewhere between half a second and 1 second. 1 second is 12 seconds, so let's jump out to about frame 8 and hit F6 to add a new keyframe there. And in that new keyframe, we're going to select our shape and we're going to expand it to the right a little bit. So with our shape selected, I'll hit Q to switch to the free transform tool, or you can click on it up here in the toolbar. And then we'll just click and drag that out a little bit, like so. And then I'm going to right click between those two keyframes and click on Create Shape Tween. And now as we click and drag across the timeline, we can see that animating out. So let's add a little bit of easing to this. We'll click on that tween arrow anywhere in between those two keyframes. We'll click on that tween, and then we'll come down here and drag our easing slider up to 100 so that it's easing out of the animation. So it starts off quick and slows down towards the end. And then we don't want this animation to loop over and over again as we're hovering over the button. We just want it to animate out once and stop there. So we're going to create a new layer. We'll double click on that layer name and call it Actions. And then we'll add a stop action to frame 8. So we'll click on frame 8 for the actions layer. We need to put a new keyframe there, so we'll hit F6 on our keyboard. And with that new keyframe selected, we'll hit F9 or Option F9 if you're using a Mac to open up your actions, and then type stop, open and close parentheses, and a semicolon to end your statement. That will stop our animation right there at that last frame so that it doesn't loop over and over again. So now for all intents and purposes, we're done with this button. We can test our movie by hitting Control Enter, or Command Return if you're using a Mac. We see our button, we hover over it, and it animates out to the side. So that's how you can create a simple button animation. Now you'll notice that with the button symbol doing things this way, we don't have a whole lot of options for creating a different animation whenever we move our mouse away from it. So we'll take a look at how to do that later, but for now let's see what this looks like with multiple buttons. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to scene 1. We'll take this button, copy it, Control-Shift-V to paste it in place on top of itself, and then just nudge it down. And we'll just do that a few times. So if we have a series of buttons aligned like this, when we test our movie, this is what it's going to look like. It's just a good way to highlight which button you're hovering over. And if you want to, you can make more animations where it changes colors or something like that. In fact, we could do that now if we wanted to. We could go into our button and then double click, or we need to go to the overstate first, and then double click on that movie clip. And then in this last keyframe, we can click on our button, and we can also change the color. Let's change it to a lighter gray. And then you'll see as it animates, it's also changing to a lighter color. So now let's test that. Control Enter, see what that looks like. And then it extends out, and it also lightens up a little bit, so it really highlights which button you're hovering over. So that's a really neat effect. And we didn't have to write much action script at all. All we needed was one little stop action. So that's a very easy way to create some animated buttons without having to use any action script whatsoever. So let's close that. File, Save As. Inside your Project Files folder, I'm going to save this as Simple Button Animation.fla. So we'll save that, and we'll move on with the next video.